Good afternoon, dear students. The topic of the lecture: Environmental Foundations for Radiation Biology. Plan of the lecture: Basic concepts of radiation biology, units of radioactivity measurement, sources of radiation in the environment, routes for the introduction of radioactive substances into the human body. The next one: mechanisms of action of ionizing radiation at the level of molecular, cell, organ, tissue, organism and population. Clinical manifestations of the effects of ionizing radiation on the human body. In conclusion, measures to protect the population from exposure to radiation. Radioactivity is a process of spontaneous transformation or decay of the atomic nuclei of some chemical elements, resulting in a change in the atomic charge and mass number, and accompanied by ionizing emission, radiation. The emitted substances are called radionuclides. System of radioactivity units includes several units. At first, 1 Röntgen is a dose unit of radiation exposure to X-rays or gamma rays determined by their ionizing effect on dry atmosphere air. It is actually deposits about 0.96 rem in soft biological tissue. The next one, REM, Röntgen equivalent man, is a unit of measurement of the effect of X-ray on biological objects. Today it is obsolete non-system unit. So 100 rem equal 1 sievert and 1 rem equal 0.01 sievert. Another modern radioactivity units are becquerel, radiation unit of measure in C, measurement system. 1 becquerel is defined as the activity of a source in which an average of 1 radioactive decay occurs in 1 second. The next one, gray. Gray is a unit of absorbed dose of ionizing radiation in C, measurement system. It equals 1 joule of energy per kilogram of living tissue. The next radioactivity units. Red. Red is an off-system unit of measurement of the absorbed dose of ionizing radiation. And sievert is the unit of measurement of the effective and equivalent dose of ionizing radiation in C. 1 sievert is the amount of energy absorbed by a kilogram of biological tissue, equal in effect to the absorbed dose of gamma radiation of 1 gray. So we see many radioactivity units, which can be used to measure of radioactivity level of different objects, for example biological objects, atmosphere, air, soil and others. Concept of radioactive pollution. There are alpha radiation is trapped even by a piece of paper, so it is not dangerous, but as long as they do not get inside through an open wound or with food and air, then it becomes extremely dangerous. Beta radiation has a great penetrating power. It passes through the skin to a depth of 2 to 3 centimeters. The penetrating power of gamma radiation, which travels at the speed of light, is very high. It can only be dilated by a thick lead wall or concrete slab. There are two groups of sources of ionizing radiation in the environment: natural and anthropogenic. Humans are always exposed to natural radiation, the sources of which create a natural radiation background. More than 60 radionuclides are distributed in the Earth's crust. For example, uranium, radium, potassium, thorium. The concentration of radioactive nucleotides varies, so natural radiation is different in different regions and territories. For example, in some region, the natural radiation is 7 to 12 microrengen in hour. Anthropogenic source of ionizing radiation in the environment. They appear due to atomic and nuclear explosions during testing and use of nuclear weapons, as well as by accident at nuclear power plants. The largest accident occurred in Chernobyl, with radioactive iodine, strontium, cesium entering the atmosphere. As a result of the accident on March 11 in 2011, radioactive elements, in particular iodine and cesium, entered the atmosphere and ocean at the Fukushima. A small amount of plutonium also was found at the station site. The average annual dose per person in Russia through X-ray studies reached 1.4 gray. It includes public exposure to devices and radioactive materials used for scientific purposes, industry, and medicine. The next point of the lecture is routes for the introduction of radioactive substances into the human body. There are following routes. After the accident, most radionuclides accumulate in cabbages, tomatoes, cucumbers, marrows, currants, apples. On the second place, there are peas and soya, then potatoes. With milk comes iodine, with meat, cesium and strontium. The fish and the seafood, lead and plutonium. Iodine 131 accumulates in chicken yolks of eggs. Cesium 137 accumulates in protein. Through microcracks and abrasions on the skin, through sweat and glands, hair follicles. From there, They are absorbed into the blood and penetrate the internal organs. The entry of radionuclides through the respiratory system is most dangerous due to the large volume of pulmonary ventilation. Many radionuclides have the tropicality to certain organs and tissue. Sites of radioactive particles accumulation you see on the screen. So, iodine accumulates in the thyroid gland, for example. Strontium, calcium, lead accumulate in bone tissue. Iron, beryllium, zinc accumulate in the liver. Platinum and lead accumulate in the kidneys. And cesium, lead, potassium accumulate in muscles. Well, let's talk about mechanisms of action of ionizing radiation at the level of molecular, cell, organ, tissue, organism and population. The author of this theory is scientist Cousin. The Cousin's theory explains us how the physical influence comes chemical damage. The first stage is purely physical in nature. The quantum of energy causes ionization and excitation of atoms and molecules, especially water molecules. In the process of water radiolysis, extremely unstable ions are formed, which decompose to form free radicals and hydroxyl OH group. The second stage is when radical and peroxide structures of proteins, lipids, polysaccharides, and nucleic acids react with water and oxygen dissolved in it. Chain reactions of oxidation occur. And the third stage is the effect of these chemically highly active compounds on the components of complex biochemical systems of a living organism, proteins, DNA, and the reaction with them. This results in disruption of chemical processes in cell structure. Now you can see a scheme of action of radiation on organism. At first, ionization, electron excitation occurs. After that, there are two options of influence: direct and indirect impact. The direct impact of radiation is change of molecules, DNA, proteins and others. The indirect impact is realized by water radiolysis and free radical formation. It becomes as a result of action, oxygen, temperature, ionization, density, etc. It leads to radiochemical processes and further formation of primary pathophysiological effects occur. And change of enzyme activity, DNA synthesis disorder, formation of toxic substances. So, the effects of radioactive particles on proteins and nucleic acid are following. Radiation energy absorbed by a protein molecular or nucleic acid can be transmitted to its structures, destroying the molecule at certain most locations. In DNA, these are nitrogen bases with pyrimidine rings. In proteins are sulfhydryl groups. Effects of radiation on subcellular level includes disorders endoplasmatic reticulum and ribosomes, resulting in reduced protein synthesis. Disorders lysosome, leading to the release of lysosomal enzymes. Disorders mitochondrial membranes, leading to reduced intensity of oxidative phosphorylation processes and suppression of energy exchange. Cell-level disorders are stop fission and cell particle death or their degeneration into malignant cells. Organismic level disorders includes damage of central nervous system, damage of marrow, and damage of gastrointestinal tract. Also, at the organismic level, the radiation effect is manifested by an increase of the morbidity of gastrointestinal tract organs, nerves, hematopoietic immune systems, the development of radiation disease, a decrease in life expectancy or in fatal outcome. At the population level, there is a change in the genetic characteristics of the gene pool due to the accumulation of gene, chromosomal, and genomic mutations. Clinical manifestations of radiation are acute and chronic radiation diseases. During the first days after exposure, acute effects may occur. On the skin there are erythems, red spots, necrosis, and hair loss occur. As a result of prolonged exposure to the body in small doses, and after the accumulation of a total dose of about 100 rad, chronic radiation disease develops. The higher the received radiation dose, the shorter the patient's life expectancy. For example, 200 to 800 rad, it's 40 days. 3000 rad, it's 8 days. And more than 3000 rad, it's only 2 days. The death of the body occurs due to damage to the nerves, hematopoietic immune systems, and the small intestine. After a long time after radiation exposure, sometimes after a year and sometimes after 10 to 30 years, there are long-term consequences of radiation exposure. These include malignant tumors, occurrence of lung, breast, thyroid, skin, stomach and intestines, uterus, various tests, cancer. Leukemias, nephrosclerosis, violation of humoral and cellular immunity, complete or temporary sterility, violation of embryonic development, reducing overall life expectancy. There are the measures to protect the population from radiation exposure. They are on the screen. Determination of maximum permissible concentration of radioactive substances in air, water, food. Discontinuation of the use of construction materials containing radioactive substances. Ongoing monitoring of enterprises using nuclear fuel. Planning of protective measures by public sanitary and epidemiologic service, taking into account probable accident scenarios of its development and deterioration of radiation situation. Also, we have some measures to treatment the population from radiation exposure. It may be use of preparations preventing the absorption of radioactive substances and their accumulation in the organism, target organs. Use of preparations promoting the acceleration of radionuclide removal from the body. Iodine prevention was effective, the aim of which was to saturate the thyroid gland with stable iodine preparations. Tableted form of potassium iodide, which many times reduced the risk of radioactive iodine entering the target organs. The next measures are calcium preparations are used to reduce the intake of strontium 90. The use of intrasorbents blocking the absorption of strontium and the intestine has proved to be very effective. To reduce the accumulation of cesium in the body, in muscles, liver, and kidneys, it is recommended to consume more vegetables and fruits containing potassium. Thank you for your attention.